Now, after that big win for the Republicans in Virginia we talked about yesterday, we need an update from the US. But before we go to Adam Creighton, I need to tell you about Let's Go Brandon, in case some of you haven't heard about it yet. It's the funniest and most dominant political meme of our time. And it started when a NASCAR crowd started chanting what sounded like F Joe Biden. But the television host either accidentally or brilliantly brushed it off as a chant for the winning driver, Brandon Brown. Have a look.
Oh my God, just such an unbelievable moment.
Brandon, you also told me, you can hear the chants from the crowd. Let's go, Brandon. And you told me you were going to...
Let's go, Brandon, indeed. Since then, the phrase just organically has become code for F Joe Biden. And it's everywhere, in the media, in political debates, even in music clips.
You know what they saying, ho?
Let's go, Brandon. Let's go, Brandon.
You know what they saying, ho?
Let's go, Brandon.
Even the kids are getting in on the act. Check out this motorsport broadcast.
Drivers, start your engine. Let's go, Brandon.
So there it is. And when I caught up with Adam Creighton in Washington this afternoon, I asked him if this meme's popularity said something about President Joe Biden's current political standing.
Yeah, certainly, Chris. Look, it really is the meme of the decade, I would say. It's just extraordinary how it's spread throughout the US. I mean, even cars that drive past my apartment on a major freeway, they have Let's Go Brandon signs and flags sometimes. And of course, at sporting events, I'm sure you've seen crowds spontaneously break into it. Just at a game recently that Donald Trump and his wife were at, actually, the crowd suddenly broke into Let's Go Brandon. And of course, Donald Trump was laughing about it. So look, it is an extraordinary phenomenon. And, you know, of course, it's a very unflattering thing to say about Joe Biden, of course, as you've just explained. But look, from the perspective of Democrats, it really is very disappointing and very disheartening, because it certainly is so popular and it's spread greatly, and it reflects, I mean, it almost correlates with, in fact, this steady fall in the approval rating of the president ever since late August, when the withdrawal from Afghanistan began, mid-August, I should say. His approval's fallen from more than 50 to down to 42%, which is the lowest of any US president in history at this stage, except, of course, for Donald Trump at this stage. But nevertheless, hardly a good showing. And so, it's a disappointing development, and it shows no signs so far of petering out.
Well, it really crystallised in a political way this week, didn't it, with the loss of Virginia for the Democrats, the Republicans winning the governorship of Virginia, a state that Joe Biden won by 10 points only a year ago. And this was a campaign where the Republicans ran on grassroots issues, on education, on the economy, on law and order, and the rest is history.
Yeah, look, that's right, Chris. It was a minor earthquake, I would say, that election. I mean, the betting markets and the polls had the Democrats up for quite some time before the actual date of the election, and then a few days before things started to change. But yeah, it was an extraordinary turnaround. Biden won that state by 10 percentage points. And the same thing in New Jersey too, I might add. Indeed, the turnaround there was even larger. I mean, the Democrat incumbent did prevail in the end, but Biden won that state by 16 points, and the margin shrank to zero effectively. So extremely worrying signs in both of those states. I mean, the remarkable thing for me was that you had in Virginia, at least, you had this outsider, Glenn Youngkin, a wealthy businessman who was the CEO of Carlyle. He had zero name recognition a year ago. Absolutely no one knew who he was. And he came into this race and he didn't talk about Trump at all. Indeed, he tried to keep Trump out of the state, which he succeeded to do. And he managed to win with a resounding victory, and he even won more votes in Trump strongholds than Trump himself won. So campaign was brilliant. By contrast, the Democrats' campaign, they tried to make the whole thing about Trump. Indeed, President Biden kept talking about Trump all the time when he was campaigning with Terry McAuliffe. In one speech, a 10-minute speech, he said Trump's name 24 times, which just goes to show you the emphasis on Trump, and clearly that failed. So now, this has caused political chaos for the Democrats. They've got these huge spending bills in Parliament here, and there's every sign today, in fact, actually, that one of them could unravel completely.
Well, this is fascinating too, because another issue that Terry McAuliffe and the Democrats tried to focus on was race. They tried to say that the Republicans, people voting for Glenn Youngkin, would be voting effectively for Trumpist white supremacy, is the way they frame it.
Yes.
Yet the same surge of Republican votes that tossed out the Democrat governor and put Glenn Youngkin in also elected an African-American woman, Winsome Sears, as lieutenant governor.
That's right. Yeah, look, that's right. Look, the Democrat claims there, I think, were just completely farcical, as any ordinary Virginian would have seen. I mean, as you pointed out, the lieutenant governor there is a black woman. And indeed, it wasn't just in Virginia on that election night. That there are a number of African Americans won positions kind of on the night on the side of Republicans. So the Democrat campaign really made no sense, I should say. They made it about race, and they because they see it as a successful political strategy. They accused Glenn Youngkin of basically being a racist a number of times, which I thought was very extreme. They tried to associate him with the Charlottesville riots back in 2017 a number of times, which is just very unfair. I mean, even if you're, not favouring one side over the other, that's just a very unfair smear, and I think a lot of Virginians would have agreed with that, and that's probably contributed to the result. They had very little positive plans to talk about except to smear the opposition.
So Adam, Joe Biden's in a lot of strife. Let's go, Brandon. The polls tumbling. Virginia falls over. He's a stumbling, bumbling president, 1 year in. He hasn't even got to the midterms a year away. But if we put that to one side and look at the lessons for Australia, I know you still keep a close eye on what's happening in Australia. Aren't there lessons here in this Virginia result for Scott Morrison that if you get back to the basics of economic management, of education, of law and order, that's what people want to hear about, not highfalutin dramas about global climate talks and all the rest of it?
Yeah, look, I think that's right. I think to run a campaign where you're constantly attacking the opponent on personal, sometimes on a personal basis, I think that's a very wrong way to go about it. And yeah, look, it's true. The Republican campaign in Virginia was very positive, if you like. It was just about the issues. It wasn't about the opposition. It wasn't about the opponents. It was about education. It was about parental involvement in schools. It was about law and order, and it worked. So look, there certainly are lessons there for Scott Morrison. I mean, I know the polls back home are not looking great for the coalition, but as you saw in Virginia, the polls can turn around extremely quickly in the space of 4 weeks. There was a wild swing here, and so I assume the government's, they'd be worried about the polls, but until the election's called and the Australian election actually focuses on the alternatives, we don't really know kind of what's going to happen. I think that's very true of Australian politics.